Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and industry experts, welcome to a captivating session of Industry Insights. My name is Matt Chester, and I'm the Community Manager at Energy Central, the online community platform for all players in the utility industry, which delves into the profound transformations underway in the utility sector. This discussion is coming out in conjunction with the recently released special issue newsletter from Energy Central in partnership with Anterix. This special issue explores how utilities are wholeheartedly embracing cutting-edge technologies to revolutionize their operations and enhance customer service. The benefits of this transformation are not merely confined to operational efficiency, but extend to fulfilling the grand vision of resilient and affordable clean energy futures. Our esteemed panelists, experts at the intersection of utility, wireless communications, and energy, will share their perspectives on how private LTE networks play a pivotal role in fueling a growing ecosystem. This ecosystem encompasses a myriad of products, services, devices, and applications, all of which are laser focused on addressing utility operational challenges and elevating the customer experience. So in today's conversation, which is the 24th episode of Industry Insights, titled Where the Rubber Hits the Road, Private LTE Networks and the Grid Application, we have the opportunity to dive even more deeply into these topics with some key and exciting industry experts that we've gathered. So let's turn our attention to the brilliant minds guiding us through this insightful conversation. And as I do so, I'll pass to each of you to say hello and kickstart with an introduction a little bit further about what your role is in this world of LTE and the digital utility. So first on our panel is Gene Jones from Anterix, bringing over 2 decades of experience in the telecommunications and wireless industry. Jean's strategic roles in product and solution technology marketing, coupled with her leadership in wireless infrastructure marketing at Alcatel-Lucent and Nokia, has set the stage for her current role as the Director of Product Marketing at Anterix. Here she leads the go-to market efforts for Spectrum and private LTE industry solutions, particularly in the utility market. Jean, welcome to today's session. Why don't you say hello and provide any other background you like as a precursor to the panel?
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the introduction. I think you covered it, but I'm excited to talk about the Energy Central issue and have a conversation today. So thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here. And next we welcome Elizabeth Cook, the Director of Advanced Grid Systems and Grid Modernization at Duquesne Light Company. Elizabeth's transformative role involves managing and leading efforts within the transmission and distribution power grids operations and planning groups. She spearheads collaborative efforts with internal and external partners, local and federal planning entities, universities, and industry stakeholders to drive advanced grid solutions and shape the power grid. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you also for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this discussion and kind of continue on educating and really driving us to bring awareness to really all external and internal stakeholders of the importance of really gathering the data, having the data, and how do we channel that back to the right people. And that usually requires a robust communication system. So thanks for having me.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that. And then completing our distinguished panel is Ken Rabedeau, the head of energy segments for North America at Nokia. With over 25 years of experience spanning the telecommunications and energy industries, Ken's innovative outlook and leadership have driven strategic programs in secure software and communications technologies. His expertise impacts critical industry markets for power utilities, oil, gas, water, and mining, making him a visionary in digital transformation. So welcome to today's conversation, Ken.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to be here today. I am excited on behalf of Nokia. I think most people know Nokia is one of the premier vendors for private LTE and communications networks in the industry. We've seen a lot of adoption of new technologies that are kind of supercharging the way people deploy technologies and do digital transformation today. And I think that this is a great opportunity to carry on that discussion.
Great, thanks, Ken. And so together, our panelists will guide us through a dynamic exploration of the future of the utility industry, shedding light on the transformative impact of cutting-edge technologies. So welcome again to the audience to Industry Insights, where expertise meets exploration and where the conversation is not just about the industry's present, but its future. So now let's dive into the questions. And at the beginning of my introduction, I mentioned that this is coming out on the heels of the Energy Central special issue. So I do want to go around to each of our panelists and ask, what are the key takeaways from the article that you authored for that special issue? And how does that, how does that come into play when it comes to utilities adopting cutting edge technologies? And why don't we start with Jean on this one?
Sure. Thanks so much, Matt. I would say the overriding message in my article was really underscoring the importance of private LTE in providing the reliability, the resiliency, security, and control that's really needed to support a modernized flexible grid. As we all know, utilities have a long history of installing and operating their own comm systems, whether it's distance relay protection on transmission lines or, mobile radios, large SCADA and corporate data networks. And to achieve the control that they need, they are accustomed to building and operating and managing their own private communication systems on a foundation that today includes fiber, digital microwave, commercial or public networks. However, the main point of my article was that utilities can only truly ensure the coverage and the performance and the reliability and the security they need when they have end-to-end control of the network. And really with private LTE, some of the main points is that utilities can manage their network separate from the rest of the telecoms network to protect their network from cyber attacks, for example. Also, utilities can communicate fundamentally more securely with devices anywhere in their service territory and control those devices that are allowed onto the network, which is important. They can also design the private LTE network with to really protect it from long-standing power outages, fortify it from against national disasters, and reinforce it to really prevent cyber attacks, as I mentioned earlier. So really, I think also the fact that it's built on a global standard, this really opens the door for a future in which sensors and controls and advanced technologies can be installed anywhere on the grid. For example, mobile workforce, drone inspections, advanced analytics, wildfire mitigation, host of other use cases mentioned in this issue, and general grid enhancement can be realized. And they really can ultimately have the analysis and control in real time, providing the capabilities to monitor the system's health overall. And this will result in reduced outages, shorter duration, fewer customer interruptions, which is key to increase the economic development in areas of aging infrastructure where customers have less options to deal with disruption. So ultimately, private LTE really provides a platform also for faster deployment to connect DER elements in areas where fiber is too costly or difficult to deploy. And then, finally, I would say just the convergence of these, multiple disparate networks onto a single platform can eliminate, costly OE&M and CapEx as well, which are important considerations also.
Apologies, I didn't realize I was muted. That sounds great. Thanks for that, Jean. Elizabeth, why don't we go to you next to share what your article is about?
Yeah. So really the energy, well, no pun intended, behind writing this is, really an evolution of my experience of being within the industry and kind of driving the vision, which is full situational awareness to the edge. So I think if you think about the communication network and what is required, and also the understanding of the power of data, those are all separate philosophies or ideas of what really needs to be achieved within the utility space. So I guess coming to the realization over time that the utility space is dependent on Wi-Fi communication predominantly. And when I was first within the walls of the utility, I was reviewing kind of our system planning, the grid as a whole, and the devices that we were relying on, relied on, communication. So, and then as we evolved in really where we're headed, the amount of data that is going to be created with all of these devices that are connecting to our system will only become greater, which will be a much larger risk and cost to the overall performance, let alone, holding that reliability within. So the paper was really just to kind of bring to light that there is a solution and there is capabilities that are being developed in the industry, and just really the importance of having that trusted network to be able to facilitate the operation of the grid, as well as to continuously bring back the data, which, I think the industry is moving fast in all dynamics. And so it's kind of like a Venn diagram, in my opinion, of how do we embrace the existing assets that exist today and increase the abilities that they have, as well as install new, as well as thinking outside the box of how we can create the reality of this very dynamic interchange of electron flow that we have yet to see. And at the foundation of that is to communicate to all of that devices. So that was just really the energy behind the article, was to bring that to the forefront and not forget about the backbone, which is the communication that is required to operate our power grid.
Wonderful. That sounds like a great article as well. And now, Ken, let's kick it over to you to hear about what you shared in the special issue.
Thanks, Matt. So my article really just kind of focused on, beyond what Jean and Elizabeth were talking about, was all the coordination that has to happen for a private LTE network really to be successful. You need not just a reliable network, like Elizabeth pointed out correctly, but also beyond that, you need partners that have proven expertise and know how to do this. You need to look at all the design elements of your existing network and how they're going to interact with the new one. You need to look at what your deployment priorities are, what your operations priorities are. And really what I focused on was, Elizabeth talked about Wi-Fi, for example. So, how do I get higher performance and better customer experiences compared to what you've been used to with your existing wireless and your use cases? And then also both Gina and Elizabeth talked about how to scale. So, one of the things that LTE is very good at, when you see from the large carriers deployments, is scaling. So how do I scale efficiently to meet the needs of utilities that as they take on new use cases, and how do I enable automation to make it easier to manage, and then improve the KPIs for managing the grid and lower the costs?
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And now, I've heard shades of answers to this question in each of you have written about, but let's dive in a little bit deeper by actually looking at the bigger picture. And I'm curious if our panelists can speak to what the specific role is that private LTE networks play in terms of enabling utilities to transform their operations and better serve their customers. And Ken, why don't I stay with you on this one?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. One of the things that we've seen is that, and I think Jean mentioned this earlier, is that utilities know how to deploy wireless. They've deployed multiple wireless technologies, but usually what ends up happening is each wireless technology only supports maybe one or two use cases, and maybe it doesn't scale properly. So I think that in this case, the private LTE standards-based is flexible enough to allow a single platform to support all the use cases, as Jean said earlier. But I also think that because private LTE is based on things like IP, Ethernet, even some cloud tech architectures that utilities are looking at today, it means that we can support some of the future use cases that maybe we don't have fully defined yet going forward.
Got it. And Jean, I'm curious if you have anything specific to add to what Ken was saying there.
Yeah, I mean, wholeheartedly agree about the platform, the private LTE, a foundational platform to unleash a whole host of use cases, today's use cases, and also tomorrow's, as well, as Ken mentioned. And then just, speaking more to, how does it help utilities transform their operations and better serve their customers? We all know utilities are facing, the issues of national disasters, wildfires, and these continued environmental factors, which are really, underscoring the critical importance of a strong communications network. And one example of how the private LTE network can improve operations and better serve the customers, just to take one of the many use cases that Ken mentioned, a solution like falling line conductor, for example. It can really help utilities mitigate those wildfire risks, increase customer satisfaction directly, and speed up the de-energization of the line and improve operational metrics. So it helps them proactively increase resiliency by specifically de-energizing the broken line before it hits with a near real-time connection. And this rapid, de-energization of the line is accomplished specifically through a low latency private LTE network that does traffic prioritization. So with that 900 megahertz private LTE network, this use case is realized. And there are obviously many other ways that the private LTE network can help utilities better serve their customers, whether it's remote monitoring or control of the distribution substation equipment, or remote video surveillance, and of course, emergency response and mutual aid.
Absolutely, yeah. And Elizabeth, I just want to see if you're on the same page here. Do you have anything to add that Ken and Jean didn't touch on?
I mean, I could add a lot, but I mean, it's all from a different perspective, right. But same perspective, right? So I guess just to kind of give our audience, the importance, I think a lot of times when we talk about new technologies, new use cases, new realizations of like, why now? Understanding where we started to give a baseline, I think is really helpful. Like, for instance, as the grid was built and evolved over 100 years ago, at the same time, the telephone system was also being created. So if you think about the way things have a lot to do with those foundational designs that were available 100 years ago, and we've, evolved. So we went from a space where the power grid really only had to communicate, via phone to individual humans that were like switching devices within the substations. From a visibility perspective, it was literally lights on, lights off, individual humans in the control houses watching and monitoring, the mechanical dowels that were created, which is fascinating and intelligent at the time. And then so where we evolved is, we eventually developed the communication system, and we connected millions of connected devices, relying on, as we said, public wireless, fiber, even some wired communications, all different combinations thereof across the utility space. Then it really became a need as innovation technology became available to the industry. And so, one might say, why now? Why is private LTE? Like, if you think about, utilities did own their communication systems at the beginning, and really the evolution of the grid, once the utility stood up and was robust and very well networked, it was they were able to offset cost in the R&D and holding up these infrastructures if others were going to support. But now we're getting to a space where we're going to be connecting billions. And so we have a high dependency of our grid as beings, and we have very high expectations. Well, that is only becoming more and more evident in all of our lives of it's no longer an expectation. It's almost, if you do not, like, we are seen very poorly in our response time. So it's now a significant dependency with the expectation of reliability. For instance, customers are being pulsed. They're more upset by coming home from a flicker on their clock than actually receiving notice of a planned outage, which is a very different perspective from a lot of where we were even 10 years ago. So having the reliance on this ability to see where all the electrons are flowing, especially, we say this a lot in our world right now, one-way to two-way, is that two-way that now is popping up in a lot of our grids. We didn't actually need to know where the electrons are flowing because it was fundamentally going one way and we could calculate it. But now we need to see it holistically. So many use cases can fall out of that, and I think they're all evolving each individually, right? So like, we've had smart grid communications for the last 20, 30 years, right? Even you could say into the 80s when we started tying the transmission networks together. We've had outage management systems that could dispatch crews and like isolate faults from the operation rooms. But now, the power of having this very fast response from what's going to the field to the operators brings a whole new dynamic of what we can learn and how we can dispatch our crews or staff our crews or create more of awareness of who and how, which creates that expediency of just the performance of keeping the grid up and running. So I guess I just want to share, like, a lot of the use cases that we can talk about all day have existed, but the evolution of having this very responsive, fast network that is controlled and managed by those that are required for the safe, reliable, affordable delivery of the electrons just brings more of an urgency to the table of having that data at our fingertips. So anyway.
Yeah, no, and you touched on the growth in the number of devices. So Elizabeth, I want to stick with you here and ask if you can elaborate on what is the role of private LTE networks in fueling that ecosystem of products, services, devices, and applications for the utilities.
Yeah, so one thing about full situational awareness to the edge, and I think a lot of audience members and really industry folk, that visibility from the substation breaker out on the circuit of distribution. One, distribution is fundamentally different in how we see it, operate it, and build it out from the transmission. Transmission is three-phase. It's rotor angle stability, power flow stability, voltage stability. It's all on, ensuring that 60 hertz coherent is happening, where your distribution is just that single phase radial lines. And so the devices over time, a lot of different utilities are different maturity, have installed intelligent pull top switches and have it really created distribution grids to be meshed in itself, because you can rapidly transfer your customers from one circuit to the other. And what you're planning for is outages happening 1 or 2 or 3 times a day from motor vehicle accidents, trees, outage, equipment failures. So having the ability to really reconfigure your grid in real time provides that quick reliability. Where transmission, if you have an unplanned event on the transmission one time a year, right, like that's even a bad day, right, for a utility. So, the redundancy and really what you're monitoring and ensuring doesn't happen on the transmission is very different than distribution. So I guess the capability of the distribution grid to become more automatic and very flexible has been available, but now we're dependent on that. And so we've created these grids that need this communication to happen. So that's, again, from the number of devices, just from a utility managing their system has grown. Like we at Duquesne Light ultimately, at one time had none, and now we have over 1,500, intelligent pull top switches, right, in a 2-county utility, right? So that's a dependency. And then our customers are all starting to install new technology where they want to manage their own energy in a very new way. Some do, some do not. So you have to serve all from the utility perspective. But that interaction down at the edge, instead of it being a deterrent to the overall operation of that circuit, we can start seeing it and working with our customers in a relatively fast form to use the assets in a way that can not only benefit the customer and their energy uses and what they want to do, but also to ensure the robustness and the reliability of the other parts of the grid happen. And I think as we've been evolving, we are seen as the utility space as a hindrance to the new technology, but I think it's more of the communication, the storytelling of if others understood how, if we did the partnership together, had the communication to be able to manage that dynamic interchange of electrons, that all of this technology actually can create new opportunities and services that, we have yet to define, but really gives us that opportunity to even start discussing it and putting it on the map board and penciling it out. So
and Ken, I'm curious from your perspective on the same question about the role of private LTE networks in this whole ecosystem that's kind of exploding.
Yeah, it's great, Matt. Thanks. I think from the other side of the coin, being one of the vendors in the ecosystem, it's all the stuff that Elizabeth said is spot on. I mean, if you look at the new approaches to products and even processes that are going to be required in order to take advantage of, say, real-time data flows or being able to manage all these assets in real time as just opposed to checking their health occasionally, which is kind of the current status. If you look at some of those core values, like we mentioned availability, reliability, the asset control portion itself, security, and lately even sustainability. So kind of 5 things where you have to have those inputs. I think that the vendor's opportunity is going to be in either creating processes or helping to partner to build those best practices that Elizabeth was talking about, so that you can build a closed loop system to corroborate all those data flows that she was just talking about. So you can see across all the layers to the status of all the assets and control systems. And that if we as vendors, both on the electrical side and in my case on the communication side, have an opportunity to evaluate our products in a new light to be able to support those types of enhancements to the ecosystem.
Great. And Jean, I want to give you a chance to speak on this question too, if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, just to complement what Ken and Elizabeth said, I mean, there's so many devices in the ecosystem that are essential to making an end-to-end communication network happen. And, we realized this early on at Anterix, and, as you know, pioneered an ecosystem program that brings together over 100 members who are technology innovators, and including a number of companies, 23 companies that deliver commercial-ready products, which speak really to the momentum in the private LTE industry, specifically in co-creating solutions for utilities in particular. So just underscores the importance of bringing together, the gateway providers, the chipset, the module providers, the software developers, the IoT folks, bringing them all together and really fostering that co-creation, I think, is so important.
Absolutely, I definitely agree with that. And now I want to kind of move from the theoretical to some practical examples. So I'm going to ask each of you if you could provide some specific examples of either utility operational challenges that private LTE network can address effectively, or how private LTE is contributing to the enhancement of customer experience and seeing this happen in the field. And Jean, let's stay with you to take a first crack at this one.
Sure. I mean, I guess just highlighting one operational challenge in particular that private LTE can address, and there are many, is effectively managing the accelerating number of devices that we've talked about, you know, the handsets, the advanced meters, the broad range of IoT-enabled devices. For utilities, it's so important that they're able to efficiently manage the devices and manage the life cycle of those devices, you know, mitigating the need to send truck rolls and field personnel out to do replacements. And with private LTE and the supporting ecosystem and solutions, utilities can, you know, manage and monitor comprehensively devices and SIMs, you know, really reducing the need for truck rolls and increased operational costs to manage those devices as they accelerate and come onto the network. And this can be done in a, you know, secure and controlled way to effectively manage those devices and manage the subscribers, you know, in a comprehensive way.
Wonderful. And Ken, do you have any concrete examples, case studies that kind of come to mind for you?
Yes, you know, from our experience, well, first of all, I agree with the scaling piece that Jean brought up and that Elizabeth mentioned earlier. So that's going to be huge. But I would also say that we're seeing, you know, adjustments to Elizabeth's point, you know, in transmission events, maybe only a few, but out in the distribution grid, we see our customers saying that, you know, they have plans to do smarter devices. I think somebody mentioned smart transformers or smart reclosers out in the network. They're doing circuit reconfigurations to be able to accommodate an increase in like renewable energy, solar, wind, microgeneration, and even just an uptake in the number of electric vehicles that you find in a neighborhood, right? It's so I think that monitoring those assets, balancing them with the existing grid activities and the corresponding, you need an increase in the quality of the communications to correspond to an increase in the amount of devices on the grid. And we think that private LTE excels at meeting those requirements.
Wonderful. And Elizabeth, from your perspective on the utility side, what are the specific examples you're seeing?
I think it's more, I mean, I guess I'll just share a perspective, an evolution of thinking, right, within the grid modernization road mapping realm. So what is grid mod? Like, that's another buzzword that's happening in the industry, but fundamentally, the grid was built for a certain aspect of how we used electrical power. And, you know, we're all working with grid assets that have aged and have had its use, but we're also working with assets that have not had the visibility or the understanding of the performance baselining. So like what Kenneth just said is, you know, we take pulses of our assets from a historical perspective and we study it and we do it well. I mean, the grid is smart and intelligent and operating 24/7, 365. However, you know, as we're transforming from assets that exist today to using them in ways that we've never done, understanding real-time performance of all of the interconnected devices will be really powerful to all utilities, even before the proliferation of all new technologies at the edge. So like giving us the data and the computational power using a robust communication network will give us the ability to baseline our current assets that we're all here to serve and ensure that we provide power. So there's many use cases just in regards to today. And I think a lot of conversation, especially within the utility space and just trying to drive the use cases, the cost benefit of those use cases, kind of a catch-22, as well as really the customer benefits. The utilities working within business models and regulatory models that really make it a dance of how to quantify and qualify all of these benefits that are very obvious to, you know, maybe Ken and Jean, and really a lot of us that are in the space, but how do you pencil that out and draft and then empower the doers that are in charge of quantifying, qualifying these benefits? It's challenging. And I think it's an evolution of realizing if we could do a no regrets, because our job is to maintain the assets that exist, that is one beautiful use case, because you can start quantifying, what is the risk of our overduty equipment? What is the risk of our aged assets? What is the risk of our assets that may already be used more than they were really designed to be? And then you can then quantify and contribute, the change of, as we distribute energy resources, so your solar, your battery, your charging, right? The change of the data that's accessible, and the customer expectation of wanting that. So I guess from a, use case perspective is, if you understand and you can kind of quantify from a monetary and really a customer relations of how this could help, really builds a nice business case, because that's really what it comes down to ensure that, the buy-in and the feasibility and really the technology exists. So I guess I just share with this audience and really, the panelists, is having the technical acumen and the conversations like these to really understand how projects and programs develop within a utility, I think is powerful, right? Because if that information share is occurring more rapidly, because every utility kind of has to do their own work, but really that fundamental use cases are all the same. So if we can create the tools and the mechanisms to educate all that are within this space of how to draft and then tell the story, that can effectively show cost avoidance, cost deferment, or even new revenue opportunities, can really give an up on how to really drive a lot of the use cases. And I will, again, privy, most use cases are already in some form available to us, but it's the latency of the data, it's the access to the data that really prevent it to become even more powerful. So.
Wonderful. And so now, in an overarching manner, I want to talk about the primary benefits and advantages of utilities embracing these advanced technologies. So Ken, can you talk about what those might be, both in the short term and in the long term?
Yes, I think that, this is one area that we always need to help utility partners define, because like Elizabeth said, you always have to make a business case for where the investment is going to benefit the community. I think ultimately it comes down to simplifying operations, both in the short term and in the long term. What will private LTE do to make it simpler to operate, make it simpler to secure, make it simpler to adopt newer use cases? And Gene said this when we first started, having one network to support multiple use cases creates a consistent platform for all those mission critical pieces, and it allows utilities a platform to create some simplicity for their internal business cases. And so when they go to talk to a customer, it's not, we're deploying technology A for this use case and technology B for this use case. It's, here is our underlying technology that we're going to deploy. Here are the simplified SLAs that we can give you, and here's how we're going to support your use cases. And you get that visibility that Elizabeth was talking about earlier. So, I would say that those are both the long-term and short-term benefits. It's simpler.
Right. Elizabeth, are you seeing those same benefits that Ken's talking about there?
Yeah, so, I think another way to play that question is, what are the current challenges of not having the ability to manage, own, and really kind of flex, your oversight of this communication is, you're dependent on another, vendor's reliability and performance, right? So like any downtime or maintenance or any technical issues directly impact the electric utility. So having that dependency really provides, that increased reliability. There's also just the cost considerations to think about, especially as data becomes more, it's kind of like, I don't know why I've done this before, but the Cookie Monster comes into my mind. But it's like a data monster. Once you get a little bit, you keep wanting more and more of it because you start to see the power of how having these insights drive out inefficiencies of the performance and ultimately creating new opportunities for revenue. But like that will then drive more onto the communication bandwidth. So having that ability to be agile and flexible with your, spectrum and the capabilities of thereof gives you just that access. So I think, I agree with everything you said, but like, what are the challenges now? And then how does that relieve? Because again, we have it, but it's only going to become exponentially harder to really be able to manage that relationships of having another, controlling and determining how your assets perform.
Sure. And Gene, when you're talking to utilities, what are those advantages that you would maybe bring up in the short and long term?
Yeah, I think it's, what I mentioned before in terms of short term, being able to, just unleash this robust platform that can, be the foundation for so many use cases and applications, those we're aware of today and those that are coming tomorrow. And the cost benefit of doing that too, the operational savings and the CapEx savings is huge, and the operational improvements as well. And then long term, I think one of you mentioned revenue opportunities. I think there's a lot of opportunity to monetize the private LTE infrastructure. There are many different business models that are emerging, where utilities could monetize the delivery of energy to customers. So I think that there's a lot that's emerging there to be discussed. And also the potential for utilities supporting others as well, munis, co-ops in the value chain.
Excellent. Yeah. And so Elizabeth, I want to go back to, you mentioned earlier what challenges might these solutions be solving, but can you also share some insights on what are the challenges or obstacles that utilities face when they do want to adopt and implement these cutting edge solutions?
With anything, it is change. So none of us like change. And so I think, the hardest challenge to begin with is internal stakeholder buy-in. Knowing that standing up a new communication infrastructure will require multiple business units to be looking at their teams, at their roles, at their responsibilities, and determining, what is the best path forward. And so, I said road mapping a couple of times on this panel, but it's really important to really play that out and create the storytelling to really get the buy-in and ensure that all parties are involved. And to do that is really getting your ducks in, like the change agent that's driving it, get their ducks in a row to understand all change so that you can speak to it, because like different groups have different concerns. And if you go in and say the wrong thing at the wrong time, you could scare off. So you don't really know. So I think it's really important to be aware of how to be a change agent, right? And be the person. So I think a lot of times I find myself, we understand the what, some of us, and we can definitely talk about the why, which I think the industry does, right? Like what I love to talk about is the solution, that there's hope. So we have to identify the people and then the how behind the people, and giving that vision, that leadership to the doers so that they understand where they're headed. And I know that there's a lot of thick words, but that is for any kind of change. So with private LTE, it is a big one, right? There's a large upfront investment. There's a lot of unknowns. The technical acumen may not even be within. And so really having the awareness, the gumption of the need, and then the business case is really powerful. So I think that is the challenges. So not only is it to get the acceptance of the external stakeholders to understand what we're doing, maybe when it comes to rate cases or, the whole regulatory model, but really to get it up and running within the internal space is knowing that it's going to cause change. And so how do you manage that change and then communicate it effectively? And as you probably may know, I don't know, engineers aren't always the best storytellers. So you just really, it's a craft. And really, how do we create the next set of workforce to really be able to do that effectively? So.
Yeah, I can jump in here, Matt, because I had the same, in terms of highlighting the one key challenge, had the same reaction to this topic, which is, how do you effectively gain the support across the constituencies in the utility, get that stakeholder alignment across whether it's the regulatory teams, capital asset and accounting. And really one thing we've found is obviously gaining insights from other utilities in terms of the process and new tools that facilitate decision-making, including, rationale, timing, cost benefit. But another key thing we've heard from a number of our customers that we've worked with is to look at the business first, the business case first, and let that guide the technology decision. So engage the business stakeholders early on, discuss the 5-year capital plan, the O&M budget, the device count projections, and use that information to guide the technology plan. And really also understand clearly how each business, distribution, transmission will use private LTE is helpful as well. So I highlighted the same challenge, and I think it's an important one.
What about you, Ken? Did you have any additional obstacles that you might have popped to mind when it comes to implementing these solutions?
I don't know if it's additional obstacles so much as it's confirming the consensus view here. It's a good perspective to look at this from a change management perspective. I mean, the number one thing we run into, and I know it's going to be funny listening to a vendor who likes products talking about the fact that the business case needs to make sense. It's, the technology's been proven in carriers, for years and years and years. We know this technology is mature and it can solve the problems, but the change management is the number one thing that we have to address when we talk to our customers. Just like Elizabeth said, whoever the stakeholder is that has lined themselves up to be the change agent, we have to partner with them heavily to get them educated so that they can make their internal transitions smoother, so that they understand what the impacts are going to be to their teams and they can articulate it clearly. And also the benefits, make sure that you tell people, look, you're going to be able to do your job better, faster, smarter, whatever and it's different for each use case, as was pointed out earlier. So I think that being effective at doing that, helping the change agent make all of or assist all of the personnel that they have internally to define their use case requirements, as Gene said, and then get those documented properly. I think that I can't emphasize enough how important that is.
Absolutely. No, it's great to hear. It almost sounds like, you guys are all on the same page in that respect, and that really hammers the message home. And again, to try to further hammer messages home, I want to turn to any notable case studies or specific success stories that you all can share to highlight the positive outcomes of utilities implementing these technologies. And Gene, maybe we could start with you on this one.
Sure. I mean, in terms of utilities implementing, Anterix, we can point to, 5 utilities that have made the commitment to modernize their grid with 900 megahertz private LTE. Xcel Energy, for example, became the 4th major IOU to move to a modernized grid and to support their service territories in, I think it's 8 Western and Midwestern states, benefiting, millions of electricity customers and also natural gas customers as well. And then more recently in April, LCRA, which is the first non-investor-owned utility providing water to millions of people, also moved forward with their decision to embrace this technology, this foundational technology. And their business supports, wholesale electric transmission and water service areas across many counties and cities. So we're excited to see that. We see it as good, positive momentum in a good direction, and also, just the ecosystem momentum that I mentioned earlier. The acceleration of the ecosystem with over 100 members and 23 companies delivering commercial-ready products really speaks to the readiness of the market as we see it now.
Wonderful. Those are some great examples. And Elizabeth, do you have any sort of internal success stories that you can speak to?
So as we are on this journey, from where I'm speaking from, we're in the midst of developing, really the use cases and the business case. I'll just share, from an industry benchmarking perspective, I'm also a part of the AEIC organization, where the industry engagement is incredibly valuable. So, I think it's really important, and, we talked about change management, change agent, it's outside of private LTE, but the power of a unified voice and having a network of experts that have gone before is tremendous in regards to like moving these technologies and these needs forward, especially, I think the electric utility industry is unique in the fact that we're all with our own little pockets. We're not competition to each other, so we can actually evolve and really develop and just drive some of these needs together. And so having, utility member organization like AEIC, to have the benchmarking, to help develop and just talk about the challenges that they've seen is very supportive and helpful. So lean in on those others that have gone before.
Absolutely.
It helps.
That's great. And what about you, Ken?
So I agree with everything fellow panelists just said. I would also add to that, when you look at the success stories that are out there, you can go beyond just the private LTE piece. You can look at LTE has been used successfully by utilities, even in the commercial space with like Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile or any of the carriers to do some of these use cases. So if you think about deploying private LTE means that you get to optimize that network for yourself to improve your SLAs. That is one place where, so you can take some of the successful use cases that have already been done by utilities and then make them even higher SLA or better reliability. And I'd also say that, recently we've seen on the private LTE side, use cases with more innovative solutions. We've seen things where one utility demonstrated inspection of transmission lines or vegetation management using drones on private LTE. We've seen where one utility demonstrated robots that can roam around the substation with thermal imaging and they can inspect assets. You can even set that up so it's on missions so that the missions can be completed automatically without any intervention. And if we look at even out on the West Coast, where you see a lot of well-publicized pieces of wildfire mitigation, deploying sensors along the power lines to help reduce the wildfire detection times and response times. Those have all been kind of newer, innovative uses that have been well publicized that have made a difference in the way utilities can manage power.
Excellent. And in the utility industry, fair or not, I think they sometimes get a reputation of being slower to move, a little bit more filled with inertia. So it's good to occasionally give them maybe a kick in the pants. So let's talk about what the real and tangible risks would be if utilities don't embrace these modern comm systems like private LTE networks and do so now. Ken, what is that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd say I want to make two comments. One is back to something that Elizabeth said earlier. When you look at, say 100 years ago when we were first building the power grid and first building all the communications networks, then those companies back then, they were the Amazons, the Googles. They were taking new technology that nobody knew anything about and trying to figure out, how do I scale it to the scale that we see today? And we take it for granted today, but back when they were first building it, they were taking all the risk, trying to figure out how to solve it, and they were the innovators of their time. And I think we've come full circle to see that utilities have figured out that they now need to be some of those change agents and risk takers, but they also need to keep the grid reliable. And so I think some of the biggest risk would be to their competitiveness. I think that the cost of keeping some of the legacy technologies around is complex, it's expensive, and it may not meet the needs of some of the use case requirements, but I think that automation and cloud are becoming must-have requirements. And I think it's not a surprise that utilities want to deploy well-vetted wireless technologies that are easier to manage and automate.
Sure, that makes sense. Gene, what do you see as the risk of failing to act now?
Yeah, I mean, the risk without private LTE, I think utilities face significant headwinds, clearly, limiting their ability to have full control over the network and respond effectively to emergencies and natural disasters, and also manage the accelerating number of devices, which ultimately impacts the customers they serve. So, I mean, probably one of the best examples of the value of grid modernization with private LTE is Flizzr, for example, where you identify the circuit damaged, isolate, restore power within minutes versus hours. And, to effectively support all those reclosers and sensors and other devices required, you really need this foundational network that we've been talking about. So I think this example in particular can help illustrate the potential costs and risks, right, of not embracing this new technology and the advantages of the private LTE system.
Great. And Elizabeth, anything to add on those risks that Ken and Gene mentioned?
I guess I just want to flip it back. I think we say the utilities, right? Like, why are we not showing up being innovative and entrepreneurial, right? So how do we change, we're a public utility, like we're here to serve all, but we're within frameworks that have really also were designed 100 years ago. The regulatory model, was stood up in 1911, right? And we're still using that methodical approach. And so I believe in, it's even the last 5 years, the change of speech in regards to executive leadership in the utility space, going from, that very, we are here to serve, a grid that has always existed. So our ability to change, it may be slower, yes, but like our risk tolerance is not as, we don't have an appetite for it because we're within these, different models. And I guess it's also, a lineage of thought, of a typical business, what drives businesses to become, bigger and larger and scalable isn't really the mechanics that we have or the levers that we have within the electric utility space. So I think, the risk is like just what you have said. If we do not get ahead of the reality that the systems that we're within are changing rapidly and really become those more innovative leaders that want to change, how do we create new generation of employees that fail fast, right? But safely, while also maintaining the reliability of service. How do we introduce the idea of risk tolerances that are acceptable not only for the customers we serve, but also the regulators that kind of allow us to do so. So as we recall, what's happening outside of how we use energy and what's happening within the walls is there's a lot of infrastructure that just doesn't move quickly. So, but there is hope. I think if the partnership and the conversations like this continue to happen, so that we all realize where we're headed. But yeah, it's all the same things that we've talked about. The devices are going to want to interact. Customers are going to want change. So how do we show up to ensure that we can facilitate those electron flows safely and reliably?
Perfect. And I know we're just about out of time, but I do want to close by asking each of our panelists to respond to the traditional last question on the industry insights, which is there a singular or most resounding industry insight that you hope the audience leaves with today after today's conversation? And I'll start with you, Elizabeth.
This is one of my other passions, but I believe it's the future workforce that can really drive us. So another thing, within the utility space is motivating and creating the space to allow the industry engagement, right? To embrace research and development and deployment, to really allow the new engineers coming through the opportunities to reach out into the industry, learn from all of these industry groups and learn from each other. And then really, even before they graduate, where do we start communicating to the next lineage of thought of our middle school and high schoolers, like getting people to be excited about serving the electrical power grid. I didn't even know what the grid was, and I was a 4-year electrical engineer 20 years ago. So how do we really start, planting those seeds in the next evolution of people that are going to be working on the power grid? So.
Great. No, I love that one. Ken, what's the industry insight you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think that's a challenging question. Maybe just to build on what Elizabeth said a little bit more, one of the things that we get asked a lot with when we have conversations with utilities, because they make some of these investments for a long period of time, is, what's the longevity of this technology? Is it going to be able to keep up with the investments that we're making on the technology side of the grid, the electrical side of the grid? And since utilities constantly make investments for long periods of time on their business cases, I think that the upside of this private LTE is that when you look at the adoption in the industry, many other industries have already gone this direction. The telecom carriers have already gone this direction, and it creates a strong ecosystem of products. To Elizabeth's point about workers, it creates skilled workers and opportunities for people, going forward in the future to work with the latest technology, not have to be forced to learn some legacy technologies. And it also has a lot of best practices. And most important, I think, when you're looking at longevity, is the fact that there are clear migration paths. Gene mentioned this when we first started, that it's standards based. So when you look at migrating, say, from 4G to 5G to 6G, we didn't really talk about what that means, but there are paths for each of the industries that have already adopted this to support the long-term adoption. So private LTE for utilities is kind of a natural evolution from our perspective at Nokia. Excellent.
And Gene, I'll put it over to you to close it out with the final industry insight to share.
Sure, I guess short and sweet, but really look to your industry peers in the industry who've taken the first step. I've mentioned 5 utilities that have made the move to private LTE with us, and I think it's such a collaborative industry that utilities obviously benefit from reaching out to those folks and understanding the decision making and the journey that they're on.
Excellent. That's a great final remark. So I want to once again thanks our panelists for joining us today, for sharing their keen insights during this session, and thank you to all who were able to listen in. And this will conclude today's session.